Hey everybody, Jay Weidner, Reality Check. Hit like and subscribe and all that. Um, my movie JFK X with Ryder Lee is up on Amazon Prime, and it's soon going to be up on Tubi and a whole bunch of other things. I'll let you know as it goes. It's doing really well, surprisingly. I think it's surprising Amazon Prime even that it's doing that well. But it is the 60th anniversary and of the assassination, so a lot of interest. And Barry Levinson, the film director, just announced yesterday that he's doing a movie on the Kennedy assassination with a script by David Mamet, who is one of the top screenwriters in Hollywood. So I wonder if that isn't some kind of response to JFKX. Who knows? Also, Corey Good sued his former business partners, and that got dismissed. And now they're countersuing him, and they're really putting the hammer down on him. I read the lawsuit, and I don't know. Never sue anybody if you can get away with it. Try to work it out without a judge, because especially if you're, telling wild stories, and the judge has to listen to that. He's not going to like it. You're wasting his time. So I expect to get my case to get dismissed here soon too, and looking forward to it. Anyway, today I have a recurring guest I'd love to have on. He's one of the smartest guys I know. His name is Ken Swartz of C60 Purple Power fame. Hey, Ken, how you doing?
Doing pretty good.
Good. Um, yeah. So you're one of the few people that actually that's still alive that actually met James Trevor Constable, right?
Yes, I think I am. Yes, and yes, and he also taught me a whole lot of his knowledge.
Yeah. So here, let me. Most of you guys probably don't know who he is. I pulled up. I pulled up a thing on him. Where is it? Here it is. So he wrote The Cosmic Pulse of Life, Sky Creatures, Living UFOs, a whole bunch of really interesting stuff. He was a radar engineer for the New Zealand Army during World War II. And he kept seeing these blips on the radar and thinking that they were about to get hit by aircraft, and then they would run out and they wouldn't see anything. And he couldn't figure out what was going on. And later he moved to America and began using infrared, I think, wasn't it?
Yes, he did infrared. He did I think it was a B1 filter,
Yeah, that's right.
and it leaves the infrared and the ultraviolet, just takes out the visible spectrum, and with that technology, he was able to take. There's a whole nother world out there that's invisible to our eyes, but exists in the ultraviolet and the infrared.
Yeah, there's these sentient creatures that are apparently, they're made out of plasma or something. I mean, I'm not sure. We haven't had enough scientific inquiry into the whole thing to really understand. But he would get these creatures in the sky. He called them skyfish, and because they do look a little bit like fish, a little bit, but some of them have a hole right in the middle of them, right, almost like a toroidal.
Yes,
Yeah,
I've seen some other things. He passed away. I don't know how many years ago. It's been
about 10 years ago.
10 years ago,
Yeah,
and
he was like
yeah,
95.
I used to go visit him at his house, and he'd pull out the books. And I mean, he even had these infrared. It was taken by a guy in Italy. These infrared creatures that look remarkably like dragons,
Yeah.
flying in the infrared, flying over like an iron plant. They seem to be attracted by its heat and stuff. So there's just a whole nother world out there. And I think it's They Live in the Sky, I think was his first book in this matter.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But that's not the only connection I have with Trevor James Constable. I only learned it after I met Trevor, put it together, is that I had a cousin called Colonel Tolliver. And Colonel Tolliver and Trevor James Constable wrote books together on World War I aces, or World War II aces.
Really?
And one was The Fighter General Life of Adolf Galland, and another is Horito. And I think there's a couple others out there. And so they got together and wrote books on World War II fighting aces.
Fascinating. Fascinating. So I also wanted to get in before we get back to Trevor here that you the Indian Space Agency used your formula to land on the pole, the lunar pole, right? The recent
Yes, and the
landing.
Japanese are using it too, and they pulled their old spacecraft out of the dust, out of the and dusted it off and sent it to the moon. And the Russians probably stole it from the info from the Indians, and they tried to land, but they were a little too bold. It was the classic case of the rabbit versus the tortoise.
Right.
And Indians were slow and steady, nice increments, did a great job, and then the Russians just tried to race like the rabbit, and of course they crashed their thing on the moon.
Right. So your algorithm what does a more gradual drift
No,
down?
no, what it is the Newton. When Newton I came up with a whole set of formulations, like 3 magnitudes more accurate than Newton's. And Newton did a great thing in his time. And what he did is he basically took the whole Earth, all the volume and mass, and put it down in a mathematical theoretical concept into an infinitesimal point. You know, it's what's called the point mass, right? But
Yep.
and then from there, it perfectly spherical gravitational field spreads out. And that
Right.
works great between, let's say, the Earth and the Moon, or the Earth and Mars, or something, or the Sun and some distant star, because they're essentially points to each other. But when you get really to the close on things, the Earth is a little wider around the middle
Yep.
than it is
Great.
on the poles, and so Newton's won't work there. They don't even use it. They have to get this fitted mathematical curve, which is just an abstraction. And also on the moon is actually gravity locked, because that's why we see it. It keeps the
Right.
same face
Yep.
toward it, and so it's actually kind of shaped like an egg. So it's not ours is Earth is an oblate spheroid. It kind of bulges out at the equator. That's the name. And the moon would be a prolate shape. And
So
so
we're,
the
we're like
actual
looking at the bottom of an egg,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Maybe the fat side of the egg. You're looking at the fat side
Mhm.
of the egg. And
Yeah.
so it's actually gravity is the highest along the rim of that egg in actuality. And so that's why a lot of space probes that have tried to land at the poles of the moon or the rim of the moon have crashed, because gravity is actually higher there than if you used a simple Newtonian formulation. And that's what's also interesting is gravity is lower, like on the side facing us, the closest to us, and the far point of that. And that's, you may remember when Neil Armstrong was landing Apollo, I think,
Gra-
11.
they're like gravity places where gravity changes.
Yeah, and also he had extra fuel. Remember the extra fuel he had to
Oh
move, and he
yes,
said, "Where did this extra fuel come from?" Well, that's because the gravity was actually less there than their mathematical constructions, and
because they were closer to the center or to the equator,
exactly. And so that's or well, to that near point. And the
that
whole
near
way that
point.
the moon, like for instance, a gravity locked body is set up, it's wrong. Like for instance, we just what humans just did is they did the moon like they did the Earth, right? They had the equator, but actually, if a gravity locked body like the moon, you should have like a near point pole and a far point pole, and the quote equator would actually be around the rim.
Uh-huh.
And then when you do that, when you actually have to remap the spheroid, and then once you remap the spheroid, then you can do the math and get a correct landing. So actually, the way that we have the moon mapped, is incorrect, at least for gravitational purposes.
So when NASA made that gigantic model of the moon in the '60s, you remember that
Mm-hmm.
huge model that they could and it was round. That was not egg shaped.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it looks round to our eyes if you look from the distance. I mean, like when you look at the Earth from, let's say out in outer space, it kind of looks round, but it really isn't. And that's really important when you get close to the things. And I had originally actually developed these formulations back in the 2000 year, actually 1999, 2000, and it was, I think, I had actually been, working with some let's say defense contractor kind of peoples that, well, actually they were in the space, it's all interlapping, but, and because it's a much better way of like landing on planets like the moon or asteroids, which are thing, or Mars. You may have remembered the Mars uh, polar lander
Mm-hmm.
that crashed.
Yep.
Well, I went and looked, NASA's covered it up now, but they were using like a straight, Mars is actually more oblate than the Earth, so it's a little bit wider in the middle. And so they were using, it appeared from what my research is, they were using the straight Newtonian. which means that they were estimating gravity was estimated to be much higher at the poles than it was. And so if you estimate gravity to be higher, they had like a 4-kilometer burn on the rocket engines. And if you estimate like 0.5% off 4 kilometers, that's like 200 yards, right? Or 200 meters. Sorry, I should do that correctly. And so basically the Mars Polar Lander came in and it was too high for, it either ran out of fuel or it exceeded its mission, its computer parameters, and crashed. So I knew Dr. Peter Smith, who was head of the Phoenix lander, which is exactly the same platform, going to land in almost exactly the same kind of area, latitude on Mars. And I wrote him a letter because I used to know him at the Mars Society. We'd go out and a bunch of other people go out and drink beers and talk about the great aliens they'd seen at the base last time.
Yeah.
Some of that stuff leaks out over a few beers. But anyway, so I told him that. He couldn't believe that JPL and NASA got it wrong because he saw my math. I don't think they used my math, but what he did is he made sure that with the Phoenix lander, when the parachute kicks off and the retro rockets fire on, that the radar altimeter and the engines were linked together. The flight computer was linked with the engines, so they tracked that sucker all the way down to the ground. Like I think on the Mars Polar Lander, they waited till like the last 100 meters, and then they kicked in the flight computer and radar. But it was too late by then because they were way off where they should be, and so that was another use of it. But the defense contractors in the early 2000s, they basically just stole it and used it for like THAAD. I don't know if ever people terminal high altitude aerial defense missile and all, that thing that had it for decades never worked, and all of a sudden they get this mathematics, and the next thing you know, it's working. The same damn thing. Yeah, how did that happen? I complained, but they told them, they told me, go blank yourself.
Yep.
We would never steal anything, and even if we did, we have multiple law firms. What do you have?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I had a pencil and I had a pen and a printer and some stamps and envelopes. So anyway,
yeah. Well, when I was back in Hollywood as a writer, I got invited by a very famous comedy show to be a writer, but I had to first audition. And so I came in and I had these row of the writers, and they started asking me questions, and I started giving stories and telling them funny jokes and everything. And then about a week later, they told me that they didn't want to hire me. And I started watching the show, and they used all of my material. And I realized, well, how clever that was. Bring in the novice writer who's just looking for a break and then steal all of his stuff, right?
Oh, that's typical. You remember Jose Escamilla?
Yeah. Jose.
Yeah, Jose Escamilla was actually the one that introduced me to Trevor James Constable.
Oh, really? Yeah, because he was getting well, what did he call them? Those things that he was getting?
Roswell rods or rods.
Rods, yes.
Yeah, and actually, and there's another thing bringing that story up. Like Fox Entertainment actually did a movie that with Jose Escamilla. I think I had I was a couple pictures of me in there because when I knew him, I was like the more of the straight guy, right? And then anyway, you know how that works. But they played it all over the world, but they never played it in the United States because if they did, they'd have to pay him royalties for it, for playing it in the United States and for all around the world. There's something in the contracts. They just never played it in the United States and cheated him out of all those revenues.
Yeah, that's what they do. So Jose, for you who don't know, he would photograph, videotape really, these odd looking rods that would fly around. A lot of people said they were mosquitoes, but I don't think so.
Oh, yeah. Go
ahead.
One of the things that was never used, Fox had the stuff, but they have like hundreds of these rods flying around the space station in orbit.
Oh, that's
the space shuttle.
Right.
I mean, the space shuttle.
Absolutely. And the ISS.
Yeah.
I mean, the International Space Station, they're flying around that. You can see them all the time. They're on, you can see the YouTubes of them. And I've actually seen a rod down here in Southern Colorado about 10 years ago. And it was a perfect corkscrew. And it looked like it was made, at first I thought it was made out of smoke. I thought it might be maybe a neighbor's wood stove going or something, but there was no wind and it was moving at a pretty good clip. I'd say 40, 50 miles an hour. And the one I saw was it was huge. It was like maybe 20 feet in diameter of the corkscrew and maybe 400 or 500 feet long. And I realized later that it wasn't made of smoke; it was plasma that I was seeing. It just looked smoky to me in my early morning, sleepy headed watching it. But yeah, these plasma creatures are fascinating because I just did a show last week with the psychologist Jerry Marzinski. The voices in my head don't like me, and
Saw that.
he talks about how mental illness is actually, he doesn't believe that it's caused by well, he says psychiatry has no baseline. It's one of the only sciences that has no baseline. He said they thought it was the way you were brought up. Then they thought mental illness was genetic. Now they think it's brain chemistry, but they really can't explain that either. And of course, he thinks that invisible beings are invading people's brains and minds and influencing them in negative ways. And that would go way towards how the Gnostics describe the archons as being these invisible beings that will influence you, and they like to have fun and all that. And so I thought, is there a link between what we call demonic forces and these sky critters that Constable was photographing?
Well, the thing is, Constable and Jose, there's a wide variety of them.
That's
There's
right.
not just one thing. There's a
Oh,
literal zoo of these creatures,
yes.
right? It's like another type of zoology. So you have just a vast number of them. I mean, he would picture some which were like blob type amoeba creatures,
Yeah.
and in fact, there was a scientist, I can't remember his name at the time, but he was a astronomer, and he kept he would take pictures of the high altitude of the Earth, and he kept seeing these like black specks that would come in, and he was thinking that they were micro water meteorites that were entering the Earth's atmosphere. And from the number of these things coming in, and that he was filming, somebody sat down and did a calculation, and if those really were ice meteorites that were coming in doing that, the Earth's ocean would be like 5 times deeper than it is.
Right.
So and the moon would probably be covered with it. So it wasn't that, but you remember the pulsing creatures, especially in the tether breaking instance. It's
Yeah.
those things, and they actually had a case with that, because I do kind of study the UFO thing, and I've just read piles of books and stuff. And they had a case. There's a couple of, I think it was in New Jersey, a couple of police officers. They got a call from something, and they went out in this field. They found this thing in the field, and it was maybe the size of a large room, but it was translucent. It was kind of like one of those like a big ovaloid thing, but it was translucent. You could see right through it. It had a little bit of sparkling lights, and it was resting on the grass, but it was so light it was hardly even making the grass bend down at all. So here's this incredibly translucent, weird thing with sparkly lights all over it, sitting on the grass, and I guess it wasn't very threatening. And so one of the officers eventually kind of got close to it and stuck his finger into it, and it kind of like popped like a balloon. Yep. And just kind of vanished. And then there was nothing, but all that was left was maybe just the lightest trace of like moisture on the grass top. And that's what I think one of those pulsing things that you see in the tether incident is.
In fact,
is one of those
I've got
things.
that up. We're going to watch it. Hang on.
Oh yeah, this is amazing. And I believe this was actually filmed in ultraviolet light.
Yep.
So it's not invisible light.
Let's see if I got it. Hang on.
This television view now as of the mid-deck glove box experiment.
All right, so I'm going to turn the sound down. So what happened is they released. Hang on here. So they yeah, here we go. Put this up. Put it over here. Hit share screen. Okay, so I'm just giving you guys. So NASA put the space shuttle up in orbit. They put this long bare copper wire, what they call the tether, and they released it out. It was originally attached to the space shuttle. They got this huge shock that came back through the wire and almost destroyed the space shuttle, and that broke the wire off and started floating out into space. Now this wire is loaded with electricity from the ionosphere, essentially, just like
basically think of an inductor. When you drag an inductor through a magnetic field, it creates a charge.
That's
And the
right.
charge grew so hard that literally where it attached to the space shuttle, the positive charge was so high it just literally vaporized the connection.
That's right.
And then you see the coil is slowly rolling back up. It's kind of coiling back up where because kind of like the way it was on the spool. And so it's kind of coiling and shrinking as it's moving away from the space shuttle.
Can you see it on the screen?
No, I'm not seeing it.
Okay.
I see space shuttle tether YouTube. I see the headlighter, but I don't see the show yet.
Oh, here it is. I got it. Hang on.
Okay, yeah, we can just cut that out, or you can cut it out. There it is.
All right. So here we go. This what you see in the center is the tether.
Yeah,
Watch
it's
what
slowly
happens.
coiling back up, but it's kind of vibrating, making it's like a slinky in space. Imagine a slinky in space.
Yeah, that's what it is. A slinky in space. As it's floating in space, the sky critters are attracted to it and begin
Yeah,
noticing it. And they keep coming in. This is what they look like. And James Trevor Constable's pictures look very similar to these.
and that's
And
the
they're
cosmic pulse
toroidal.
of life. That's one of the things that Trevor said is things that pulse are
Yeah.
live. Because
Yes.
like the way we breathe, the way our heart beats, well, it's the same for these creatures.
See it? Look at this. This is just fascinating. I remember when this first happened, I was so blown away. That might even have been the reason that I got into all of this was that space shuttle. Okay, let me get back to here.
Yeah. And probably those critters, their whole mass might, fit into the coffee cup here. So yeah.
Okay, unshare, stop sharing. Okay, there we go. So that is what they look like.
And that's one form. And there's also, we saw kind of like the round pulsy things. They also have some that are like little triangles.
Yep.
And some various the corkscrew shapes like you saw. And also one of the things in one of his books, I believe it's in the Cosmic Pulse of Life, he records some astronomers seeing something like that, except it was like hundreds, maybe, miles long, 10, 20, 30 miles long. It had that same, so it might be like space whales that come in and eat that space plankton, because that's what really that looks like. It really looks like sort of like a plankton-like creature, except it's of course much bigger because it's been space. It probably doesn't have much more mass actually. And then there's other critters that eat those critters, and probably critters that eat those critters. So there's a whole ecosystem out there in space that we think is empty, but these are like plasma creatures.
Yeah, and Trevor Constable was the first guy to really get it on film. And if you think back, if you go back in time, you could say that probably all paranormal experiences are the interaction between us and this other world that we
Yes.
can't see. I mean,
Well, you can see it. You can buy your 18A film, 18A filter, put it on your camera. And what's interesting, he's done sometimes, they did studies where they had like a digital camera and they had like the film camera with the silver iodine film camera to take pictures at the same time. And the silver iodine film camera would see something, whereas the digital camera would not see it. And so what they think is happening is actually the energy that these things are putting out is actually being absorbed by the crystals. As the crystals form in the actual film, it's actually filming this etheric energy, and that Trevor talked a lot about. And whereas the digital thing, just filming photons, doesn't get that. So, and that's even another thing. It gets really complicated, but you really need like to read his books, especially the Cosmic Pulse of Life. That was one that he made toward the end there, and so it'd be the most comprehensive. I believe They Live in the Sky was his first book, and
yeah,
then they had
Cosmic Pulse is the best one for sure.
yeah, and then Sky Creatures, and then Cosmic Pulse of Life, and also he did the etheric rain engineering, which is probably what he taught me.
So you're saying that using cameras with film, you have a better shot at getting it?
Yeah, some creatures, some of them, some certain types like the rods and stuff, you'll pick them up on digital and thing. You best it's if you had filters, but other times you can't pick some of the stuff up on a regular digital camera, yet a film camera will pick it up because it's recording, especially some UFOs, because a lot of those use like that etheric energy, and so you'll get these exposures where you won't see it on regular film. It's It's because there's a thing, it's torsion. I don't know if people ever heard of Professor Kozyrev and torsion, and some people call it prana, chi, ode, the orgone, all of these different names they have for this primary kind of life force energy or whatever they call it. And that's like, electromagnetism is a third dimensional thing. This is like a fourth dimensional. And like with Professor Kozyrev, I believe you did some shows about
Yep.
Kozyrev stuff that
Yep.
and they could
Colorado,
actually,
amazing.
it allows you to manipulate time. It
Yep.
says electricity manipulates charge. This torsion energy allows you to manipulate time. And we can do it now. I mean, that's basically what bases on Trevor's etheric rain engineering stuff, which there are videos online, YouTube, you can go and see. It's that same thing, but it's in the level, it's in the level of Ben Franklin with electricity. So that's the level Trevor and I are basically at. We're like, we can do fun little things with these simple machines, but it has the same potential, just as, just the simple Leyden jars and other things that they had in Ben Franklin's time, came into the electronics that we have today. In the same way, torsion technology will probably in a couple hundred years, totally transform the world as well, with a higher level of technology that, quite frankly, almost 99.9% of modern scientists have no idea even exists.
Well, yeah, Robert Temple in his new book talks about all the sky creatures and the electroplasma universe and all that. And he points out that 99% of the universe is plasma, but our physics only looks at 1%,
Yeah.
the liquids, gases, and solids, right? And kind of ignores the plasma universe when it's almost everything. So we have to rethink everything. And by the way, I don't think it's going to be a couple hundred years. I bet you they solve the secret of torsion technology within 2 decades.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I'm already using it, for weather modification. I don't know. I did a weather. I even informed the governor. So from 2011 to 2016, from June, I think it was June to the next June. And you can actually go on US Drought Monitor and you can see how the drought in Colorado, because I got tired of every time they had a drought here, they just raised water prices. So I said, screw that. So I did like a 5-year weather modification thing here in Colorado and completely eliminated drought. And you can go to the USDroughtMonitor.com, go back to from I believe June of 2011 to June of 2016, and you can actually see the results.
Oh yeah, when Reich went to Tucson, it was in the middle of a big drought in the 50s, and he had a little like 5 acres, and it was all green. And the water department in Arizona like visited him and said, "What were you stealing water or something?" And he's like, "No, I got this orgone machine that's bringing the rain to us." And of course they didn't believe him, but yeah.
And that's actually where Trevor's stuff started with Wilhelm Reich.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
and so he had an assistant named McCullen. I think John McCullen, I think was the name of it.
Yeah.
And he actually, Reich had died in federal prison for basically thought crimes.
Yeah.
And well, actually he was 2 weeks from getting released and he had the heart attack. You know how that goes.
Yeah.
They just, one of those things. And but McCullen, his assistant, had to met Trevor and kind of taught Trevor a lot of stuff. And then Trevor took it for another, because Trevor worked on
I didn't know this. This is fascinating.
Yeah, Trevor worked on a cargo ship called the Maui. It went from Honolulu to Long Beach. He lived in San Pedro, right there on that hill next to Long Beach.
Yep.
That's where he was living. And so he did that for, I don't know how many years, almost 20 years. And what he would do is the original Reichian stuff had water. So he was the radar officer and the radio officer on the Maui, I think the radio officer, but he also did the radars. And so he took kind of Wilhelm Reich stuff and he used water, but eventually, flooding the deck all the time with seawater was a pain and problem. So eventually he found you could actually use cold water grounds to it, get the same effect. And so you can see this on YouTube and other places. I think his site, eventually the guy that supported it in New Zealand never took it down or something, but it's probably on the way back machine. And so he was doing that on the Maui, and he has he'd do the rain engineering, and he'd actually have the radar in the ship. And so you could see the two things correlating, and he'd just he'd set it up, he'd say, here it goes. And then you could just see the clouds appear, and then pretty soon rain would come over the Maui. and 20 years of doing that back and forth. But he also developed other things for devices for like on land. He did a bunch out in like Desert Center and some of those places out there kind of in the
Yeah,
Mojave,
out near like
Palm
in the
Springs.
Mojave.
Yeah,
Mojave.
except the Palm Springs
Yeah,
Desert
Palm
Center
Springs area. Yeah.
out there. There's a couple streams that run off the mountain. Like he was using ones that would like, because Wilhelm Reich always grounded everything into flowing water.
Yep.
And so that just very effective. So he had a bunch of these pipes, and he used to make rain in Southern California. And he had cincher and clincher and these other things. And he'd inform the government and do all that. And then it would happen and rain in the middle of July when it never happens in LA, he'd just rain the town out. So that he did a bunch of those. And they also stopped some hurricanes from hitting Hawaii.
So you say you're using toroidal technology to help us survive the drought?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't do much these days. I mean, I did that, and if you look at the Great Drought, watch how it shrank all the way down, except for one tiny spot in Colorado, and then that tiny spot in Colorado as the drought shrank back out, and then I don't do it all that often. Just when things get bad, I'll do some weather. Where I'm living now, it's not the best place to
I'll be
do
right
it.
back. All right. So about 2007, I was in Peru and I was spending time with the Quechua shaman. And as I was leaving, he said, I'm gonna give you a gift. I said, okay, what is it? And he said, well, it's a symbol of the most important thing in the universe. I said, okay. I was kind of mystified. And then he gave me this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the toroid.
Yep.
Which is one of the key concepts that you can think of.
Yep. They carefully carved out this rock to match what a toroid is, which is what the skyfish look like too. And so we're right on the edge of this new understanding of the electric universe. And it's really, really exciting. And so I want the people that are looking into the plasma electric universe to understand James Trevor Constable's work, because the idea that there's living beings in this invisible plasma universe all around us will help us further understand the universe and the mysteries of this universe.
Yes, and it's like our airplanes kind of look like birds.
Yeah.
Right. Well, in the same way, UFOs also look like toroids. A lot of the mechanical type ones, because that's for the same reason. You use the principles of nature, you imitate the principles of nature to achieve the same sort of goals. And so it's not an uncommon. Of course, the U.S. government has a lot of back engineered tech from off-world sources that they use. I mean, I thought Stephen Greer's latest thing was pretty interesting, where he had that one witness come forward, and they developed this new high-end technology, and what do they use it for? Gun smuggling, gun running, drug smuggling, and human trafficking. That's what all that high tech ends up doing. So they can make money, so they can support their black budget, illicit programs.
Yep. Definitely. That's probably what they'll do with the toroidal technology is using.
Oh yeah, I mean, look what the CIA was doing, smuggling cocaine, and they actually couldn't sell enough powder cocaine to the honkies, so they came up with the crack cocaine and then flooded the inner cities with that because it was so much more addictive.
Now that's a conspiracy theory. Just
it is. Yes, it is conspiracy theory. Yes, it is.
Yeah, I knew Gary Webb, by the way. Yep. Used to talk to him on the phone all the time. Then he got knocked off after he wrote that story.
Oh yeah. They don't like that really much.
No, and they they're I mean, the whole thing, it just came out that, for the last 4 days, we've had to hear about this hospital in Gaza that got blown up. And now this morning, they're telling us, oh, it was just a parking lot outside. It didn't really get hit. Like, wait a minute. There's protests all over the world about this
Yeah.
hospital getting hit. Now you're telling us, and CNN and nobody sends a reporter out there to see if the hospital is indeed blown up, right?
Yeah.
They don't bother with that.
I mean,
So,
it's concrete. It was, yeah, I'm sure it was severely damaged, but that's the hospitals are like refugee compounds,
yeah,
where they're just packed with thousands and thousands of people.
yeah,
And it was a J dam. Anyone who knows anything knows it was a J dam, but whatever. It's
absolutely.
just, they'll just tell the people, they'll tell the peasants whatever they want to believe. And, a large part of them will believe whatever they're told.
So you think
Remember
we're headed
that
to
they
war?
all went down and did that because somebody told them they should, and now they're paying the price. Well, you think they'd learn, but it doesn't seem to happen.
No, I heard a report today on, I forget, I was watching a YouTube show, and the America has this history of racism against African Americans. Totally true. And but this guy was a historian, African American historian, and he was saying that um, uh, the whites wouldn't let us into their schools, so we built our own schools. The whites wouldn't let us be in their hospitals, so we built our own hospitals. And then he started doing a statistical comparison of the schools, the white schools and the black schools, especially in the South. And the black schools were at parity with the white schools, all the way up until the 1960s, when the Great Society came in and kind of changed everything. But
Oh yeah, well
I was
that
surprised.
was the war on black families.
Yeah, I was really surprised. There was no crime in the black communities. You could walk down the street at 2 a.m. It was a fascinating
They
lecture.
even had a higher marriage rate than whites.
They had the higher marriage rate than right. That's right, by
But,
far.
what it was all based around was the church.
Yeah,
The church. It was all based. The whole community was based around the churches, and of course that's been pretty much completely destroyed. And of course that was the plan.
yeah, that's sad. It was the saddest thing I've ever seen, to see the once great people be decimated like this. Of course, we don't get taught any of this, that they were actually quite accomplished on their own. But and I never got it taught to me either. But it's fascinating. I mean, wow. And it was Booker T. Washington actually was the force behind all of it.
Yeah. Well, everything used to be, church run.
Yeah.
Most of the churches and even universities, they were church run, and but they can't be controlled by the state. And so the state doesn't want churches educating children. The state wants to be the one, the masters who run the state, because the state's just a tool. It's like a shovel. You can use a shovel to dig a ditch or whack somebody on the head with it. Guns don't cause crime. People using guns cause crime.
Yeah.
And so the state is just a tool. And so they want those kids, they want those kids into the state schools where they can give them the state indoctrination, so that then when they get out, they'll be, the good, obedient slaves of the power structure.
Apparently, not one student in the Baltimore school system is up to where they should be in their grade. In other words, we're all about 4 or 5 grades behind where they should be.
Yeah, and you can't tell me that not one student in all of that school system doesn't have the intellectual capacity to at least be above standard.
Absolutely.
So so what's gone on there? It's just a total destruction of the education system.
Yeah, I don't even teach algebra anymore. They stopped teaching it. And it's like, that was my favorite part of math, was algebra. I'm like, what? That's problem solving. That's how you achieve. I don't know. It's pretty frustrating.
Yes. They call that algebra racist, math racist, but algebra comes from the Arabs. That's why it's called algebra. And the numerals we use come from India. Our 0, 1, 2, 3, that we don't use Roman numerals anymore. So, but it's got to the point of ridiculous absurdity, just complete insanity. But you know what they say? There's the old saying, whom the gods wish to destroy, they first drive mad.
They are driving us mad, that's for sure. Let's get back to the sky critters and this plasma universe, because I'm doing a lecture at the Stairway to the Stars conference in November on alchemy, and I'm going to make a direct correlation between the plasma universe and what the alchemists were talking about and what they were teaching. And it's only It really has. It's never been talked about in public and I don't know why. If the alchemists don't want to talk about it in public, or maybe they don't know. I suspect the latter, actually. And but I'm going to show how all the alchemical symbolism and what they're talking about, the secret fire, is really plasma. You know, you can't understand alchemy unless you understand the secret fire. That's the fire that does not burn. And it's plasma. And
Yeah,
so
but
alchemy was using plasma to manipulate 3D reality.
yeah, and fire itself is also a plasma.
That's
There's
true.
different types of
Fire is
plasma.
also a
Yeah,
plasma.
there's plasmas that burn and there's plasmas that don't burn. And I think that's that whole other world that exists around us. I think they could see, because
Yeah.
who knows? I mean, alchemy, some of that stretches even back for pre-Egyptian times.
Oh yeah. No, it goes back to
Ancient. I mean, it's probably the oldest of anything.
It is. And it's the basis not just for chemistry, but also astronomy, because astrology and alchemy were linked together very closely. And also the symbols that are used in alchemy. So they'll say that the oak tree is assimilated is associated with Mars, right? And you're like, well, how can that be, right? But there is a plasma relationship, is what it's saying. The plasma signature of an oak tree is very similar to the plasma signature of the planet Mars. That doesn't mean they're the same. It just means they have the same kind of plasma signature. And alchemy is all about that. But you wouldn't know it because nobody can explain any of it to us, at least, not here in the last 150 years or so. No one's been able to actually tell us what was really going on in these alchemical books. I mean,
well, like the tarot cards.
Yeah,
the tarot cards, actually, alchemy, they're like symbolic hidden meaning in all the things on the tarot cards. And that's a way that they could pass that information on, because the average person would just see the card, but somebody who knew the knowledge could describe the story from all the little elements that are on that card.
Yeah, and so what tarot cards are doing is they're not predicting long term. They're catching what's happening in that moment that they're being laid out, right? This is what's happening in this moment, and it can change. You can do it another layout, and it'll change. I'll tell you a little story. This one is I've never told this story in public before. I had a big, huge radio show in Seattle, and I gotten really popular. It was kind of a conspiracy, new age, that kind of stuff. And it was very popular. And I got invited to a very prominent person's party, and a big party. It was a big new age person in Seattle. And I was married at the time to another woman. And we went, this is a long time ago now, 30 years ago. And we went to the party. And all these big wigs that live in Seattle were there. And it was really fun. But there was this top tarot card woman reader doing free readings. And you got to go to, she's the best, man. She's the best. So I said, okay, I'll go to her. So I sit down with my ex and I say, okay, let's do it. So she shuffles the cards and she lays them out. And I see immediately when she gets done laying them out, she kind of gets this weird look on her face. And she's looking down at the cards and she looks up at me and she looks down at the cards and she looks over at my ex. And then she goes, are you married? And I went, yeah. And she goes, is that your wife? And she put right my wife, who's right there. She's just sitting right there. I go, yeah. And she goes, oh. She starts grimacing again. Finally, I go, well, just tell me what they say. I got getting kind of upset at her. And she looks at me, she goes, oh, okay. Well, you're going to leave your wife in a couple weeks. And I had no intention of leaving my wife. You're going to leave your wife in a couple of weeks. You're going to fall madly in love with another woman, and you're going to leave her behind, and you're going to move to another city. And I went, oh my God, that's the most outlandish thing I've ever heard. Right. And I totally just disavowed her, got up and left. And 2 weeks later, about 2 weeks later, I did meet the love of my life. And at the same moment that I met her, I got a huge job offer to move to Boulder and, from Washington State, and it all came true. And here's the funny part: I didn't even remember any of this until about a year ago. I
Oh,
completely forgotten it until
oh,
about a year ago, and I went, "Wow, she absolutely nailed it!" Right? So you say what you want about tarot cards, but that one was a little too real for me. So let's get back to James Trevor Constable Wilhelm Reich, the this plasma universe. I can't remember. Somebody was telling me about some night vision thing that was invented in Vietnam, and
yeah,
uh,
the red ones.
yeah, the red ones. And they could see into the red spectrum. What was that about? They saw
I
these
think,
like critters or something.
yeah, I think they're also seeing into the infrared spectrum, the
Uh,
near infrared, because it
yeah,
was the red. So I think they're also seeing in what we would so the near infrared, and they were seeing creatures, things, that were out there, and kind of what the same Trevor would see, because that's one of the things they would do, is especially they had a special Sony camera that they would use, that and it which would really allow them, this is like a video camera, allow it to go deep into the infrared, and
right.
then they put that 18A filter on it, and or it's 18B, whatever. I think maybe it was 18B filter, and it would block out like the all visible light, but to leave the ultraviolet and the infrared, and they'd see all kinds of things. So, yeah, it's quite possible that people were seeing, these not just things in the thing, but they said they were like demonic entities, or like
Yeah, you
critters,
guys were
things.
shooting at them,
Yeah, but they weren't there. They
but they
supposedly
weren't
already,
there.
because they
Yeah.
were plasmoid creatures.
Yeah, and the brain is plasma too. So, um, the blood is plasma. I mean, I don't know. Is it possible that plasma entities can communicate to us because of the plasma in our brain? And
It's
maybe this is,
possible.
yeah, maybe this is where ideas even come from, or all sorts of things. So,
Well,
I
yeah,
mean, I
there's
don't
there's
know.
some yeah, there's some weird. This kind of goes off the track, but like there's a thing that happens every time Mars gets closest to the Earth. They have these things where like large numbers of horses seem to get killed. They had one out in Calhoun where they this happened when Mars was the closest, and there was like a whole herd of horses. There was something like 18, 20 of them, and they all found them, and they were all drained of blood, and some were still standing. They were still standing, but they were completely drained of blood, the whole herd. And this, I was, I can't remember that crop circle guy. I'm not crop circle, cattle mutilation guy.
Oh, Chris Chris
Kalilinski.
O'Brien.
No, not Chris O'Brien. This is the other guy on the other side of the mountain range.
Oh,
Chuck
yeah,
Kolinsky, or whatever that
yeah,
says.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Polish
think,
names, which I can't pronounce at the moment.
yeah.
And he knew about that. That this, and that's like some weird, something came down and just like drained these things of blood and then left. Very strange.
Yeah, that is strange. Um, there've been other reports of that, like whole herds of like elk that they found and all drained of blood and stuff. I've heard these reports before. I wonder what that's about.
Mm-hmm. So it's these what is that? People have seen these things, and sometimes they can kind of form from plasma. They see them in the infrared, like they did some of the classics where they did two pictures, and they had the infrared camera and the regular camera, and then they have the UFO is be on both of them, and then it disappears in the visible, but it's still there in the infrared. So they could just whatever that was, it can get rid of its signature in the visible light. So, but it's still visible in the infrared.
And you got to wonder if that's conscious or not.
Mm-hmm.
You can turn it on and turn it off. And that would explain a lot of the UFO sightings, actually, because they turn on and they turn off. I mean, I've seen UFOs that turned off on me, completely just boom, gone after me watching it for over a minute, just like turned off a light or something.
Yeah, so they just move from they change whatever frequency they're operating on until it's out of our visible range. Our visible range is very, very thin. We don't, of the electromagnetic spectrum, we just see a tiny fraction, and the rest of it is completely invisible to us. Like what's like television. Those waves, we don't can't see those television waves, but you turn or the radio waves, but you turn on the radio and you can hear that information there.
So you think that the intelligence agencies would know about these invisible critters, wouldn't you?
Oh, I'm sure they do. Absolutely they do. Yeah, I mean, and just like the remote viewing, when they quote shut it down, no, that just means they moved it to another location and made it go black where it won't be visible.
Yeah. So how do you explain remote viewing?
Well, it's well, it means that, obviously from the speed of it, it's faster than light speed. So you can remote view from here for that torsion technology. That's faster than light speed. So
Yep.
you can see here to another star system in real time. They've done that with remote viewing, but you can see also the past and to a certain extent the future. So in some of the remote viewing, there's been cases where people have actually done stuff and changed what was going to be happening in the future, so it didn't happen the way it was going to. So there seems to be some flexibility of that. It's not totally fixed, but they're also the guys at the future forecasting group. They're actually also seeing if they can use remote viewing to influence past events. We'll see how the Dick Allgire's been doing something like that. He hasn't totally released it, but
So
we'll see.
Dick Allgeier is trying to influence past events
Oh
through
yes, he
remote
has.
viewing.
Anybody
Really?
he hasn't released the results, or they have to develop the protocol, then they do it, and then they can see if they can actually influence past events, which would be very interesting if such a thing was possible.
Well, I don't know. There's a couple Mandela effects which have baffled me. I got to tell you.
Yes, so yeah. So we just
I
that's one of
still
those
can't get
questions
over
to answer.
was it Moonraker? Or yeah, Moonraker with the jaw. No, is that Moonraker? Might be Diamonds Are Forever. The
No,
James
with the
Bond
jaw guy
movie.
was Moonraker, the guy with the big jaws, the metal
Yeah,
jaws.
I remember seeing that in the theater and thinking how funny that ending was with the girl with the braces that are now missing. It's like,
Yeah, the girl had braces and pigtails,
yeah,
and then he was with her, and they're in that piece of
yeah,
the space station that was flinging out into outer space.
yeah. And he smiles at her, she
And then she
smiles back,
smiles and she had braces. I remember
and
that
then they're in
because
love.
it was funny, right? Here's these braces, right?
And I can't think of any way that you would remove that.
How can you do that?
You couldn't go back and remove all the things with her having braces and all the VHSs and DVDs that are out there. There's no way. There's no way. So it's almost like a break of in time. But why? Or is
Yeah,
that
well,
just
but I remember, yeah, because I remember. I mean, I haven't seen it since I first saw it, but yeah, she had braces. She
yeah?
smiles and has the braces on, which is kind of like the funny shot, right?
It was the funny
They're
ending.
together. He's really tall and she's really short, blonde pigtails, and then
Yeah.
they smile, and he's got the big metal mouth, and she's got braces, right? I mean, that's why they did it for
Why they
for
did it?
the
It's not.
humor effect.
It doesn't work without it.
Yeah,
Yet if you watch it now, she doesn't have braces. So you
well,
explain that to me. I can't understand it. I mean, I
no,
can't.
that is a mystery that
As a person actually understand that all the technical aspects of filmmaking, this is not possible. I mean, it's not
well,
possible. It's just not. So how did it
because
happen?
there's hundreds of versions out there, right?
Yeah,
Scattered all over the world. How do you change all of those ones? You don't know where they are. Nobody knows where they are. They're sitting in somebody's dusty closet somewhere, right? Nobody knows. Nobody knows where it is. How does that change?
how does it? I mean, and then why? Then why did they do it? I mean, is it just an after effect of another thing that they're doing that had a reverberating effect on reality, and that was one of the things that got altered, or because I can't see the whole point of altering a James Bond movie to screw with our heads.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. It's just a side effect of something. I expect it's a side effect of something bigger.
Yeah,
And I'm sure the Mandela effects, the quote, the ones that are authentic. A lot of things aren't real, like Krispy Kremes. It used to be spelled with C. Well, they did a change in patent law
yeah,
and trademark law that you couldn't patent a word. So Krispy Kreme with the C, you can't patent that. So they just put K's in front of it. And then, oh my God, Krispy Kreme, that was, no, that's not the Mandela effect. That's due to copyright, trademark change in law that they changed all those brand names and did
yeah, yeah.
things.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
that's
there's
people need to
there's
be,
explanations for a lot of the Mandela effect.
yeah. So you have to be careful.
However,
Yeah.
I'll tell you this: uh, about 8 months before Nelson Mandela actually really died, because I don't remember him dying before he actually died. But about 8 months before he died, Michael Tellinger, South African guy, a good friend of mine, he says, "Oh, Nelson Mandela's dead." I go, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, Nelson Mandela's dead, and they have him on ice." I go, "No."
Oh,
And he said, "Yeah, they're gonna announce that he's dead at Christmas time, so everyone will be calm." And I thought, well, that's really weird, you know. And
now
then I
that
started looking,
I
and I
can
didn't
believe.
see anything of him, no speeches or anything for like from the time he told me that. And then it came Christmas time, and guess what? He died.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, that I would believe that. Yeah, that's probably sounds like
yeah,
something that's a real happen. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So, there was a weird Mandela effect for me. I mean, in my life, I actually got told that he was dead while I thought he was still
Yeah.
alive. And it turned out he probably was dead. And Michael Tellinger had good information. So I don't know.
Yep. So I guess we have diverted off from Trevor, but yeah,
That's right.
Trevor did all that stuff, and I think he mostly was toward the end there. He's just doing the weather etheric. He had like a little device in his house that he could experience, and then there's another guy up in San Pedro up, and he had like a big gun that you called it, and he actually had like a water pond, and he used to have the duck. The duck would go in there, and it was a really old duck, and he would once again in that pond with all that etheric energy, he'd be swimming around like a young duck again, and kind of energized it, and so, but I think those guys have all passed. There was a guy, also an older guy in Santa Barbara, and one guy in Honolulu, Hawaii, who
Yeah.
might still be alive, and because there was a hurricane that was averted, and that might have been him with some of the equipment he had from Trevor. Because Trevor always he had two houses. He had apartments. He had an apartment in Honolulu and an apartment in San Pedro, because that's the ship would just come back and forth, right? That's all it did was the Maui, which was a cargo ship going from Honolulu back and forth. And so he had a guy out there that he taught. And that's, if you go to see, he also had one where he put it on an airplane. He put like tubes on an airplane, and then he'd fly the airplane, because the etheric energy levels are much stronger in the tropics than they are in the temperate things, and they flow at different things. Like up in the upper and southern parts, it flows from west to east, like with the air, but in the tropics, it flows from east to west. And so you fly up against the etheric, and it kind of builds it up. And when it builds to a certain level, it attracts. It's like if you have a coffee cup, and no, we with coffee cups, you put hot water in it, and then it just slowly cools up. With etheric energy, when you start concentrating it, it causes it to concentrate even more. So it's like your coffee, you cause the coffee cup heats up on its own, right? And when it hits to a certain level, that's when it causes the condensation of clouds and eventually rain. And so it acts totally in this kind of in a spiral form energy. It's a spiral wave, Krunsfeld wave, spiral wave,
Yeah,
and
like
uh, and
Schauberger.
yeah, and it has a totally opposite behavior than what we think of heat and entropy. And that's why science has a hard time grasping it, because it operates in a different manner, completely different manner than heat and entropy. And so they just think, oh, it's got to be the way that but this is a moving, a living, a self-focusing thing, and it's totally different than. And so regularly trained scientists have a really hard time grasping that, because it's virtually totally opposite of what they
Yeah.
understand of thermodynamics.
Yeah, that's right. And the etheric energy actually, it gives the body, your etheric body actually warms up your physical body. It has a warming effect on it. That's why right before death, you go cold, you get cold, because that's the
Yeah,
etheric body collapsing and leaving but behind the 3D body. And as soon as it collapses, you get really, really cold.
yeah.
And, it's a very powerful thing. And I believe that the physics of the etheric physics are going to be the next great breakthrough in science.
Oh, it is. And one of the things is it calls to what we common called entropy, because
Yeah.
in the quote classic scientific materialist view, the Western view, it's like the universe is like a big clock or a thing. It's been wound up, and then it winds down. And so the whole universe is going to go into heat death. But in reality, entropy is zero, because for every bit of entropy produced, syntropy or negentropy, negative entropy. And that's why we exist, so that the sun is creating entropy as it fuses, and it releases this energy, And so it's doing entropy, which is what that energy is created, but that energy that sends out has this synthropy or negentropy in it. And that allows things to go from a lower complexity to higher complexity. And that's what, like, if you look at evolution, life over time, life has gone from lower complexity to higher complexity. And like the structure of the earth has gone from lower complexity to higher complexity as the energy works through it, because that's negentropy, that's negative entropy. And so the actual equation balances out to zero, not positive. And so the whole concept of the heat death universe doesn't exist once you add torsion technology and this other side to it. And there's not only that, there's energy around us. And a lot of the quote flying saucers, they literally fly by pulling this etheric energy out of the, once you get it up to speed, like Schauberger stuff, right? You pull it up to speed. Once it gets on speed, it just pulls energy from the environment. So you don't need fuel in a sense. It's fueled by the environment itself. And I think a lot of those, like those little pulsy creatures and other things in that level also probably use that kind of thing. It's different from, you know, the understanding. In fact, it's almost opposite. And so modern scientists have yet to really grasp this whole nother level. But it's, you know, there's Professor Kozyrev, there's Trevor James Constable, Wilhelm Reich, some of the earliest, but even before him, there was Baron von Rickenbacker in the Ode. He did like a whole bunch of studies and stuff. So this is, you know, this is a long-term thing that people have been learning about. And it's just not, I mean, it's like pyramid power, you know, there really is things that happen in pyramids. But like in the center of the pyramid, there's actually, you know, things get better, but down below, right below the pyramid, like where the Queen's chamber would be, it's like a negative things get worse there. So you have a place where, you know, that etheric energy is being concentrated. And remember, this planet's spinning. So that pyramid is moving through. So it's not just static. It may look static to us, but it's actually a moving object. And that motion through the ether or through the superfluidic vacuum or through whatever you want to call it is actually creating that creates, you know, potential, and it creates those higher potentials. And like Wilhelm Reich, he had these orgone. Baron von Rickenbacker did the same thing. We could concentrate this life force energy. You couldn't contain it, but you could concentrate it over other areas. And it had a variety of effects, some positive and in some cases not so positive.
Yeah. And Wilhelm Reich, one time, he'd been working with the orgone for a long time, and he went into a dark room. He looked down at his arm, and his arm was glowing blue. And then he got a mirror, and he looked at himself in the dark, and his whole face was glowing blue. And you know,
it's the same as that blue glow around the astronauts. And then they say, oh, it's from the water in the that they use to cool the spacesuits, right? Which is their water releasing, but if it's just the water would be everywhere. It just wouldn't be right next to the person.
200-degree temperature, I think it would not last long.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not.
Actually, it's 250 degrees above zero on the surface of the moon. So
but all you put up but you put up an umbrella, and then it's like 180 degrees below zero.
It is.
There's no
in the shadows.
So it's just it's totally and things, and and anyway, they'll never, you know, I really doubt we're really going to ever colonize the moon or really do that there, because, you know, they found that the moon dust is just pure death. What it is, it's metallized glass. It's ceramic glass shards, the whole surface of it. And it just, I mean, it's like the worst silicosis you could imagine. And
the moon is constantly rained on by micrometeorites.
Exactly. And that stuff is super abrasive. It's super reactive. And it's deadly toxic. Now you go to Mars, which is kind of like the Earth. It has water, it's got sand, it's really dusty, but it's like dust on Earth. You know, it's like hanging out of Burning Man or something, you know, dust everywhere, dust on Earth, but it's stuff we understand is not totally toxic to us. Whereas that the stuff you get, you know, where there's been no water, been no stuff, it's this metallicized ceramic glass, just nasty, pure nastiness.
But you could colonize the inside of the moon if it was hollow.
Yes, if it's hollow. Yeah, if you did that, if you got underneath and just a plain old rock, you know, you still have, you know, it's got silica dust, but it's not that. So but you know, Elon's right. If humans are really gonna go and colonize someplace and do Mars is by far a much better place to go than than the moon. I mean, Mars has these, you can see the whole crater is full of frozen ice, right? Just land your damn spacecraft on top of the giant pile of frozen ice, and you got all the water and fuel and everything else that you're going to need.
You ever see the Hale crater civilization on Mars?
I've seen stuff, yeah, that they released or what's left of it. I think it's all ruins.
It looks like farm fields, active farm fields, and
I think it's just, there's all kinds of, there's ruins on the moon. That's one of the films Jose made. I think it was called Moon Rising.
Yep.
And in the original Clementine tapes, which I, by the way, have a copy of, the ones
You
that they
do?
released, not the original ones, but the ones that were released, when they had objects on the moon they didn't want you to see, they just airbrushed them out.
Yeah.
But they didn't blend them, right? So you have a tower.
You can tell right where it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
boom, here's a tower. Here's a dome. Here's that, because they didn't understand the whole concept of like blending and doing that. They just airbrushed it out. So they did. They just, okay, we just got exactly right. So that was and I think you can still get it out there. By the way, Gaia bought everything that Jose has.
That's right.
Jose was there
I was
toward the
behind
end.
that. I was behind that one.
Oh, okay.
I'm the one that encouraged that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen the so the Clementine, it photographed the dome that's in our Aristarchus,
Yes.
the blue dome over Aristarchus, the
Mhm.
crater. And NASA would always block out Aristarchus, the gray it all out so you couldn't see it. But there's definitely a blue dome in the crater of Aristarchus. There's no doubt about it. And that's
Yeah, so
the place. And Aristarchus is also the place in the NASA generated report about lunar anomalies.
Yeah, lights, especially
About
lights.
half of the anomalies take place near Aristarchus.
Yes, and that goes back to like the earliest telescopes, people
Yep.
looking at the moon.
1600s, yeah.
They would look at the moon while the moon is in the dark, right? It's it's in the dark, and they would see lights on the moon.
Yep.
And that was one of the places that they saw a lot of lights.
Yep.
By far.
Yeah, look it up. Dome over Aristarchus, and you'll see it. It definitely exists.
Yeah, there's
All
a whole
right.
bunch of others. You ever get the book "They Live on the Moon" or
Oh, yeah.
somebody's on the moon? I think.
Somebody lives on the moon.
Yeah, something like that. I got that book. It's a little
George
paperback.
Leonard.
It's in pieces, but they have just some of these amazing photos of definitely
Yeah,
definite structures.
definitely. There's structures. I've seen them, and I've actually talked to people in NASA who admitted it. So oh yeah, there's stuff up there. So I believe that the lunar orbiter, the two lunar orbiters, they went over around the moon in '66 and took photographs. I believe that the original ones, have stuff on them that is astonishing.
Yeah, what's really interesting about all of NASA photos, and this was set up at the very first, when they first did the satellite photos, the private public, they actually went to private corporations, which were actually like, because you can do things, if it goes to a private corporation, you can do things that the government can't.
Right.
Of course, these private corporations are owned by defense contractors. And
Of course
so
they are.
NASA went up there. All of the NASA footage and everything went to a private corporation for processing, and then it was released back to NASA. So there was never.
We know who that private corporation was?
I have to research it, but it's out there. People have talked about it, and they would be, so it'd be because it's like, well, I'll take an example, like Johnson Atoll. My dad was the expert in the Air Force's expert in missiles, and they had that one missile blow up on the pad on Johnson Atoll. Actually, what happened was it was sitting there and it wasn't taking off, and the safety officer panicked and pressed the button. And but my dad was set in there to fix the problem, and what the problem was, the missiles were getting were vapor lock. And but before he came into Johnson Atoll, they made him sign for the island. So the island became his personal property. So like if there was another accident, it would be his property that was damaged, not the government's. And so the government didn't have an obligation to clean up a private property of some individual. Now, if it was the government's land, it would have to clean it up. But if it's some private individuals, then they didn't have an obligation to clean it up. And so anyway, eventually my dad found out it was basically just vapor lock in the kerosene pumps. because
Right.
it's hot, it's humid and stuff, and so the program went on. But the interesting thing, when he left, he never signed the Johnson Atoll back to the U.S. airport or to the U.S. government. So
So he
technically,
still
since
owns it.
I own Johnson, I'm one of the heirs and owns Johnson Atoll.
Let's go there.
Yeah, but they somehow, I don't think they're going to let me go there and
Yeah.
claim it for myself. I can make my own little kingdom.
Yeah. Well, I know people that do that. All right, Ken, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. You know so much, and you really are smart. And tell us how to reach you.
Oh, you could just, well, I guess I'll just use my email address, ken at shopc60.com. I am the C60 guy. We have shopc60.com. That's where you can get the best sublimated C60 products in
Definitely.
the world. And so if you want to, we've done discussions on C60 before, but if you don't know about C60, you should research it.
Really
It's
should. I take it every day. It's really great. And it actually, believe it or not, kind of goes into what we've been talking about.
well,
Once you
yeah, it
understand
increases
what
people's
C60 is,
the
yeah.
ability, because we have like a lot of the remote viewers use it, a
Yeah.
lot of psychics, dowsers and stuff. It gets rid of the brain fog.
Yep.
And so whatever skills you have just work better because the brain fog's out of the way. And it also works for professional athletes too. There's a lot of professional athletes that use C60 because, it gives them that edge over the competition. And it's completely legal, not banned by any organizations.
Yeah, and it helps with healing too. So
Oh yeah.
those little muscle tears and everything.
Yeah, especially as you get older. It's really great with the gray haired crowd.
Yeah,
Because that's where you really notice it.
all the Gandalfs.
Yep.
All right, Ken. Well, thanks, and really appreciate it. And as usual, you're extremely knowledgeable.
Okay, great.
All right, everybody. Um, I want you to watch next week. I'll be back. I'm going to do a course on alchemy at some point. And I'm Jay Weidner, and you've been watching Reality Check. Thanks for watching.